Ports open.
Hopefully that is not a sign of things to come on this week's awesome episode of Holy Happy Hour Batman. On this show, I'm joined by heroes of the gaming and geek world to talk about life, faith, spirituality, and whatever else comes up. So I am really, really excited about today's episode, despite the crazy start. I have not just one, but two brilliant game designers of some of the coolest tabletop roleplay games that I know out there. I don't know of two guests who have a cooler lineup of games. Hannah Schaffer and Evan Rowland are here. And between the two of them, we're going to talk about their games. Just awesome lineup of games. We're going to talk to them in just a couple of minutes. So a few housekeeping things here at Holy Happy Hour first before we kind of get into stuff. The first thing is, as you know, we've moved to our Monday night time slot at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, which is, if you're watching this live, when you're watching it. So the show is 7:30 p.m. to about 9 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to raid. The plan is to raid right on over to our other Monday night show from the All Ports Open Network, Branching Paths with Kimber and Josh. It's a really fun show. It's on the All Ports Open Twitch channel. Kimber and Josh play classic video games that Kimber has never played as a new gamer, and Josh is sort of the wizened old gamer of yesteryear on her shoulder, guiding her through the classic games. They were doing Maniac Mansion as the first game. I'm not sure if they're still doing that or not, but it's a really cool show. Lots of really interesting video game history and stuff like that in it. So if you just stick around after this show, we will hopefully be raiding right into that one. And then I want you to all mark your calendars for next week's Holy Happy Hour here at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, because game designer and influencer, I would say, Grant Ellis is going to be joining me. Another awesome guest. I'm really excited for next week. Another thing about today that's very exciting for me is because my Masks actual play podcast, Delinquent Comics, launched its brand new arc today called Vega Rising. Vega Rising issue 1 is out wherever podcasts are found. And I think it's really good. I'm really proud of it. I won't waste any more time talking about it here, but I hope you'll check it out. That's Delinquent Comics wherever podcasts are found. So, all right, it is happy hour here at Holy Happy Hour Batman. So, as usual, I have beverages inspired by my guests. Since I have two guests tonight, I have two cocktails to share with you. I'm really excited to share these two. So, let me go ahead and I think I'll share this one first. So, the first cocktail I have here is called Mud is Better Than Wet Dirt. And Mud... So it's inspired by Hannah's game Mud, sort of, in name only. The weird name is because my wife and I were discussing what I should title this cocktail, and we were trying to find good synonyms for mud, and there are none. And wet dirt was one of the things that our Alexa device told us, so we said Mud is a better name than Wet Dirt, so we titled it Mud is Better Than Wet Dirt. But the drink is also better than Wet Dirt. It's an ounce of rum cream, an ounce of coffee liqueur, an ounce of dark rum, a few dashes of cocoa bitters, sort of shake it up in a shaker glass, poured over ice, and it's super good. If you like kind of sweet cocktails, like dessert drinks, it's really good. It doesn't really have anything to do with golems, but it's a cocktail. Also, and I still have a little bit of this in my glass right now, I made another drink inspired by Noirlandia called Let's Solve a Murder. So like I said, this one's in my glass literally right now. I'm going to make it a little bigger so you can see the recipe card. It's 2 ounces of Bloody Butcher bourbon. I chose to use this bourbon because of the name, obviously, because of the murder reference. A 1/4 ounce of simple syrup, a 1/4 ounce of sour cherry liqueur, a few drops of liquid smoke, and 3 dashes of bitters. You shake it up. I shook it up in a shaker, poured it over an ice cube into a glass. It's really delicious. It's a little bit smoky. It's very earthy because of the kind of bourbon I used. And man, I was thinking before the show that if somebody out there wanted to play a game of Noirlandia with their friends at their house and serve this cocktail, man, that would be the coolest freaking thing. So just throwing it out there. So that's Let's Solve a Murder. I'll be sharing these recipe cards after the show on social media and on our Discord server, where I always post all the recipe cards. So, all right, that's all my pre-show warm-up talk. So let's go ahead and bring our guests on the show. We have two amazing guests here. Hannah and Evan are joining me. Welcome to Holy Happy Hour, Batman, Hannah and Evan.
Hello.
Hello.
How are the
Thanks
two?
for having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on my show. I'm really excited about this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for a while. So, how are the two of you this evening?
Good. Yeah, it's a nice day. We were in a heat wave this past week, but it kind of broke today, I think, just for this Holy Happy Hour.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's a huge relief.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Well, so, yeah, I mean, I'm on the East Coast. You two are on the East Coast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I'm on the East Coast, a little further south than you. And it was really, really hot. I mean, just like crazy hot. And like, I don't have this issue, but a lot of people I work with have they have to record and stream, and they want to run their air conditioning units.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, what do? You can have good sound quality and die.
Right.
Or you can have bad sound quality, I guess. But
Yep.
I'm glad the heat wave broke a little bit and got some relief from it. So we're going to talk about your games, but before we do that, I thought maybe a great starting place for people to get to know you a little bit would just be how the two of you started designing games together. Like, I don't know if that's a part of your story I remember hearing, or you might have talked about it. So I actually didn't list what games the two of you are famous for. I guess I could do that a little bit for folks who are watching. If you don't know, between the two, so together they've designed games like Questline, which I mentioned, but between the two of them, they have amazing games like Damn the Man Saved the Music, Noirlandia, Mud, which we're going to be talking about here on the show. That was sort of my reason why I wanted Hannah to come on, was talk about Mud. We've talked about Jewish game design on this show before. I don't know, a whole bunch of other games, but also they are the hosts of the Design Doc podcast, which is basically about designing Questline U2. So maybe on that show I've heard you tell this story before. I don't know, but how did the two of you start designing games together?
Do you want to answer that question, Evan?
Sure. Do we start with Owl and Raven?
I think we do. Yeah, I think we have an origin story.
Yes.
So after college, we ended up in a town where we just did not feel like we knew anybody. And we were like, how do you possibly make friends when you're in your early 20s outside of school? And Hannah had the idea of opening a community center.
It's a terrible idea.
So this is like the most effort, the maximum effort strategy for trying to make a friend.
I was like, how hard is it to open a community center? Like, wait, life is basically Stardew Valley. Like, let's just open up a community center.
And so, like, we went shopping around for different spaces that we could rent downtown, and we found like a little basement space that I was like, oh, well, this is a no-go. And Hannah was like, it's perfect. And started up a community space. And so on the opening day, the opening event, we had like the new space is open gathering. And about half the people who showed up were game designers.
Like, coincidentally.
It just turns out that this area, it's two things. It's that this area is particularly dense with game designers.
Right.
I don't know what attracts, but they're here.
Right.
And the other thing is that game designers like have nothing to do. So they were all free, and they're all lonely, and so they all popped in, and that definitely set us in motion. We had talked a little bit about like maybe making a video game together before that point, but with this like new set of friends, they put us on the path to making role-playing games in particular, and like showed us the ropes with using Kickstarter and doing some crowdfunding. And, we just met our mentors.
Yeah. And I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't say like who some of those people were.
Yeah,
so the people that rolled in, on this little like opening event to this community space were like Vincent and Meg Baker.
Yeah.
Joshua A.C. Newman, who made the Shock game, Epi Ravachol, who did Worlds Without Master, and Emily Care-Boss. It was just like, this dream team of people. And Evan and I had never thought of, I had never even played a role-playing game before. Evan had, but it was the first time that I thought of like, maybe pen and paper is where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
So were you doing video? Did you play a lot of video games before that? Were you a video game player mostly?
I was, yeah.
Yeah, same. There was some role-playing too, but video games were my, like the source of my childhood friction with my mother. Like they were like a very core part of my identity.
We're getting into it right away.
Yeah, there you go. It is something about, it is kind of amazing. It's like one of those like weird things about being at a certain place at a certain time when there's just like a certain group of people. I don't know what it is about those like little nexus of history moments where there's like what you're talking about with the area where you all are designing games. Like it's just such an incredible group of super innovative tabletop role-playing game designers that for whatever reason you all live in that area, and it's I don't know. It's just one of those things.
We're really lucky.
Well, and talented, honestly, because was Questlandia the first game the two of you designed together?
It was.
That's right.
Yeah, and a total product of sort of that time and place and running that community center.
That is that is really cool. So I'm curious, Hannah, because you said you didn't play role playing games before you started working on doing Questlandia. What was the first role playing game you ever played?
So the first role-playing game I bought a few years before the community center had opened up, I had been doing some childcare work and was in like a local game store and was with an inconsolable kid who really wanted magic cards. And I was like, okay, I'll get you some magic cards. I don't know, take my credit card for these two magic cards. And the person at the counter was like, I'm sorry, like this is like a 10-cent purchase. We have a $20 minimum. And so I, like in a panic, I was looking around for something else that I could add to my purchase. And behind me, there was like this giant orange book that said like Shock, the role-playing game.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I'll get this. So that was the first role-playing game I owned. And it took years before I like interacted with it. But it was this moment that really came together where, when Joshua Newman was one of the first people who came in, I was like, I have your book. I actually don't care about role-playing games.
That's nuts. The story is insane to me. That this is a true story.
It's not that flattering. It's like not super flattering to tell somebody that you have their book because you had to meet a credit card minimum. But,
especially someone you end up becoming friends with and like,
and we are super good friends now. So it might have been Shock. It may have been Shock then, like the first game that I played.
That's quite an introduction.
To
tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is seriously a story that you would think would be fake, or in like a movie or a TV show or something like that, because it's just so funny. Wow. Well, thanks for indulging me with my question just about what your first game was. But I am curious about when you started doing game design together. Then, like from that really interesting starting point, did you have like principles in mind for how you want to design games? Did you have like what was your sort of approach?
One important thing in Questlandia that Hannah was spearheading was just like a idea of accessibility for somebody, and sensibly somebody who did not wasn't immersed in role-playing game culture, didn't have special dice. Like we wanted it to be a game that you could play with regular playing cards, with just 6-sided dice. It's that kind of stuff that anybody would have around, and we wanted to write it in a way that was inviting and clear to someone who is totally new to role-playing games, which that's a principle that has survived throughout our games. I still think that's a wonderful way to write a game, to write it as something that's welcoming to a complete newcomer.
Not that everyone has a cork board around, like if you're going to play New Orleans.
No, I mean, yeah, it's been this tension, I think, in our games, which is that, you know, we've grown as game designers too, and it's sometimes it's like hard to make a super accessible, easy to play game as a beginner game designer. Some people really nail it. Like some people just get it and they make a beautiful and elegant game right out the gate. We've needed more time, but the intention was there. You know, like the spirit was there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I imagine that people who, for almost nobody, it must be right out of the gate, right? Like it's got to be a product of lots and lots of testing, lots of play testing, lots of refining, lots of feedback and input, and so that the final product, I imagine, which is sort of what you all are doing with Design Doc, right? Like, because it's been 2017, right? Is when you got started doing.
Wow!
You have to call us out.
I'm not trying to. Hard-hitting reporting. No, I mean, I actually was. I couldn't believe it had been that long, actually, when I went back and looked, because like I started listening to Design Doc when you all started that show, and I remember it was like around the time we were all still going to cons. So like I saw the two of you at PAX Unplugged after I had been listening to Design Doc. So I was
cool.
It had to have been years now, but I was a little bit. Well, we all lost a year.
It's definitely been years. Yeah.
Yeah. So how is sort of development going with Questline U2?
That's a good question. You know, on the intention level pretty well. We kickstarted Mud back in October, which we can talk more about Mud later, but Mud was supposed to be this game. Well, when I came to Evan with the idea for Mud, I was like, Evan, we're so busy. We have to do Questline U2. I have this idea for this like really small zine, but also it's probably going to get way too big. So I just need you to tell me no, basically, because people are waiting on Questline U2. And so I pitched Mud to Evan and he was like, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. And unsurprisingly, Mud took months longer than we expected. So in terms of where Questlandia 2 is, we're just kind of getting back to it now. And so it's happening. Just like Mud, the golem that is Questlandia 2 is coming back to life and sort of taking a different form as we've, had some space away from it.
Yeah, Questlandia 2 has had to put up with a lot of us doing something that is more immediate and at least has the intention of being a smaller scale. Like, okay, let's just make a little thing to like get away from a project that's changing a lot and is very difficult, or to deal with an immediate, just kind of like we need to sell something, we want to have something ready for the next convention or whatever. And Questlandia 2 has been bumped around by those, but I think in the end it's all going to be for the benefit of what Questlandia 2 becomes, because it's benefiting from all the experience that goes into every one of these little interrupting projects.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that there's something about that speaks to just what your creative process is like how your creativity works, like how the two of you process your creative process?
I think so, yeah. And I think, for part of Design Doc was also just inviting people into a conversation about what this weird game was going to be. Like Questlandia 2 was like the concept, and it's an ongoing concept. Like it is not done evolving yet, and especially a game like Mud, I feel like has really informed some of our ideas about like what we want this game to look like. And I mean, living in almost a 2-year pandemic has done that too. Like, I think a lot of people are just thinking about their lives and creative work and like I don't know, the value of like being a person living a life, and it feels a little fragile right now.
Yeah.
So that's definitely really informed like the process of making anything over the past more than a year.
Yeah, can you say a little bit more about how you see that like informing the process? Just because I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's a really deep thing you just touched on. So just curious if you could say more about how you see it informing the process.
Yeah, I mean, prior to, a big part of the past few years has been that we were working on this board game, Good Dog, Bad Zombie, as a part of Make Big Things, our former company. And Make Big Things was great. It's a co-op. We all love each other. I mean, it's a 3-person co-op, so there's only one person who's not here. But all three of us, we're good collaborators and really cared about each other, but had like different things that we cared about at the end of the day in terms of like the games that we wanted to sort of go forward and continue making. And I think that being in a pandemic and just the fears of literal fears of losing people that you care about, or fear of losing like money and stability and your health, we all got to sit down together and be like, we've been sort of cruising through this process of making these board games over the past few years. And like, maybe this is a time where we can all like sit and just sit for a second with like what we want out of our lives. And I mean, there's no part of this pandemic that has been like a gift, but it did force us to sort of have that quiet moment of like consideration for what it was that we all wanted. And we were able to sort of, quiet operations on Make Big Things. And Evan and I have gone forward to make Mud, this little zine, and Brian is doing his awesome things with Tessa, his company. And yeah, I think that may be an experience that a lot of people have had in different ways. It's just like sitting back this past year and being like, what is life?
Yeah. Well, now that you say that, I'm sitting here thinking, oh yeah, I have been feeling that way too. Oh my God. Everybody's been feeling this way. Like, it's not just me. Yeah. Well, I don't, I do think that good things can come out of really horrible, bad things. Right. And so I do keep having conversations with people on this show and elsewhere where they say like, yeah, like this has been just what do you even say about a global pandemic for a year and a half, and the awfulness of it. And yet there are definitely these byproducts, whether that's sort of self-discovery, whether that's, whatever it is, that come out of it, and sort of through the forge of this really terrible time, some insights or, whatever. So there, yeah. Well, anyway, I do want to talk about Mud. So I'm wondering if you could just tell us about it so we don't keep dancing around it. No, I'm just kidding.
Sure, yeah.
Tell us about Mud, and how, we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, so Mud is probably not the first game that came from a subtweet, but
it could be.
It could be. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it probably isn't. So I mean, Mud came from a few different places. Well, I'll say what Mud is. So Mud is this zine game, this solo role-playing game story that we made about a golem. A golem is an idea from Jewish folklore of like this animated construct made from clay or earth, and is usually like has some sort of maker that has brought it to life to serve a purpose, whether it's like to protect the person that created it or to go out and destroy a bunch of people. I mean, golems like follow the whims of their creators. So I don't know how long ago this was, but I opened Twitter one day and there was this conversation that had emerged about golems with people saying like, oh, we see golems a lot in games, but actually they're offensive. Like they're a Jewish thing. You can't use them. And this conversation, as happens on Twitter. Like there's not a lot of room for nuance. And, you know, as a Jewish person, my first thought was like, I had never really thought about golems in my life. And it's so weird to see like all of these people being like, listen, Jewish people and golems, like, they just really care about their golems. I was like, this is weird. Like, I was like, I'm sort of offended. And I appreciated people talking about like where golems came from and like giving them some context. And I was also just like, this is like something I don't ever think about. And I mean, so naturally, the next step was to make a game about them. Because I suddenly was thinking about them all the time. But yeah, so I mean, I started to talk to Evan about doing this zine about a golem because, you know, it did bring this idea into my mind. And golems are like, they're kind of like shapeshifters. And I think shapeshifters are really interesting. I think that you can like push a lot of metaphor onto a shapeshifter. So yeah, I don't want to overspeak. And, you know, I mean, Evan, this game is a full collaboration between the two of us. So if there's things that you want to say about Mud.
So as we like talked over the idea of this zine, there were a number of themes that we felt just like interested in talking about, that it felt like just sort of fell into places they would fit in a story about a golem. And those are themes of like coming to terms with your own body and your relationship to your body, and this, you know, like this tension between the body being something that you haven't made, like that's just what you find yourself in, but you have to actively come to identify with it as you. And that can be a rocky process. And we both just sort of like clicked with the idea of looking at a golem, like grappling with that. And also just the sense of like, of the idea of purpose being ascribed to you and then falling away because it's not your own purpose, and being left trying to figure out your own in that vacancy. And dealing with purposelessness and thinking about like where do you find a sense of identity? How do you figure out who you are in the world? What gives you those answers? And so the idea of a golem traveling and trying different things and hoping to figure this out, you know, it all just worked. And plus, you know, it was going to be like a little like 2-week project, so why not?
Just like Questline U2. Yeah.
Well, when you first started talking about the game, did you know from the beginning it was going to be a solo game in zine style? Was that right out the gate?
That was part of the plan. Yeah, right from the original.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about a solo game? Like, how did solo? It's such a niche thing, such an interesting thing. I'm just curious, like, what inspired you to want to make it a solo experience?
Do you want to answer? I have an answer.
I'm curious about your answer, Evan, and maybe I have a different answer, but.
Well, for me, it's two things. One is that, like, we both were interested in solo games that we were seeing other people make. Like, just into the idea, curious about it.
Yeah.
So that's something that was, like, already on the docket as an exciting thing to try. And then it also just felt like it really fit with the mood and theme that we were trying to express with this story of coming to terms with yourself.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how does the gameplay of it work? What makes it, because it's more than just a game, right? It's sort of a zine. It's sorry, I'll let you just answer the question instead of trying to explore the answer myself.
Yeah, I mean, the game elements, I think that some people would consider the game elements like pretty light.
Yeah.
To me, it's a game. I have a very flexible definition of what a game is. Mm-hmm. I'm like, if you say it's a game, it's a game. But, I mean, Mud is basically this, I think it looks more like a graphic novel, like a short graphic novel. And it's this story of this golem sort of waking up alone in a cottage and immediately needing to ask the question of like what its purpose is. So through this story, you sort of are the golem, and you're answering the questions of like, what is my purpose? What is my dream? And what is my claim to beauty? And those are the three themes that you carry throughout the game. And as you go through the story, you lose and gain different purposes and dreams and claims to beauty as you interact with people in a village who find you monstrous, or find a community of golems that accepts you, but you still want the like love and acceptance of these humans that hate you. So you're just sort of, as a game, you're kind of interacting with these activity prompts and also, answering these questions about different dreams and seeing your golem through its journey.
Are you left with is there any kind of byproduct you're left with at the end of the experience? Is there like something at the end that exists that didn't exist at the beginning? Other than, of course, your maybe transformation of playing.
I would say yes. It might be a spoiler.
Oh, then, okay, yeah. As I was asking, I wondered if I was actually asking you a spoilery question.
Yeah, it might be a spoiler. I think yes, is what I'll say.
Yeah.
That's so cool. It's such an interesting concept. You also describe it as a game about queer identity. Am I right about that? Can you say something, tell us a little bit about where that comes in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of, I think it's a game about like queer and Jewish identity, just thinking about like bodies that have existed in tension with like what is considered acceptable or beautiful. And like Jewish people and like Jewish bodies have been subjected to like ideas of beauty and have been in conflict with ideas of beauty, and queer bodies certainly have. And, I mean, in terms of this story about this golem sort of figuring out who it is and what body feels like right for it to inhabit, that's queer AF. So.
I'd also add that, like, let me think how to express this. There's an aspect of the golem story that follows someone who is thrown out of consideration for like living a normal life, for connecting to people in the normal way, and is struggling to sort of put back together some sense of connection and identity. And I think that's both something that can be a universal experience that anybody can go through, but I think it applies especially to queer and LGBT, where you just find that like you end up in a world that wasn't built for someone like you. And even in the process of finding acceptance and connection, you run up against the limitations of a society that still just would rather assume you out of existence because you're a complication, because you're not normal. And in that way, maybe it's a little queer as well.
I was just thinking that it's all deeply personal, and I'm just curious if there's stuff from your lives that sort of influence. That's a really personal story. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just curious, like, where in your lives maybe shaped that story, led you to help people explore that story and tell that story.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, it's called a Golem Memoir, which is sort of, I feel like that title is sort of like a little bit more distant now from the original idea that I had approached Evan with, which I think going into it, it felt like a much more personal story for me, because like I'm a queer person, but personally have struggled with like a lot of body dysmorphia. It's just been like an ongoing struggle in my life, and something that I've just had to like work on for years and hash out. It's this thing that exists, and then it's this thing that also exists in terms of like queerness and Jewishness. Like it's just connected to so many parts of like my day and the way that I move through the world and view myself. And so I think I personally became sort of attached to, when people were talking about golems, like this idea of the golem as like something sort of made for somebody else that is, golems usually aren't considered beautiful. Like they're kind of crude, and they're often made to serve, I don't know, I don't want to say a crude purpose, but they're kind of like blunt force instruments. And it's just, the idea of a golem telling its own story it moved me. And as Evan and I talked about the story, though, we were like, this is sort of taking its own form, and it's expanding into like ideas that we both have about like bodies and our own bodies. And it also became the golem story too. So
yeah.
Yeah, just thinking about how it's a weird thing to be a body, right? I mean, it sort of depends on people's sort of, I guess, understanding of human identity. But the way I think of it, anyway, to be a body, but to feel disconnected from that body, which I think like we see reflected in the history of philosophy and spirituality of. Not everyone in history is like a dualist when it comes to body and mind or body and soul. And yet there's a lot of people that in the history of philosophy that feel that disconnect. So it's a really interesting story to tell, that idea of trying to reconcile that disconnect. That's such an interesting story to play with, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So bodies, lots of thoughts about bodies going into this story.
Yeah. So, you also described it as being kind of a spiritual experience. So did you kind of go into the design of it thinking like, okay, I want to bring a sort of spirituality to this, or did that, I mean, obviously it's rooted in Jewishness, but I'm just curious how that influenced it, and whether there was like an inherent spirituality in your approach.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of two levels to that. And Evan, maybe you have stuff you want to say too. I mean, one thing is that I never, going into game design, like I just never thought about Jewishness, like my own Jewishness and Jewish identity in game design. Like I've never felt at odds with being Jewish. It's always something that's been important to me. But there was maybe a part of me that was like, making a Jewish game, well, that's a little proselytizing or something. I don't. It was just like, it wasn't something that I ever considered, and maybe even felt a little self-conscious about. So, I feel like Mud has been, I mean, for me, it's been a little bit of a spiritual experience, because it's also just like given me permission to think about, like my culture and religion again in a way that I haven't for a while, and this is like the first time I've told a Jewish story, besides like, being like, remember what happened on Hanukkah 2007, which is like a different type of Jewish story. And like maybe one that a small group of people would be Yeah, so I mean, for me in that way, I feel like it's been a spiritual experience, and then I also think that the game invites a spiritual experience. Like the game sort of asks you to sit with some of these prompts that are a little bit meditative and asks you to kind of consider where you're at, which I think is spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah, Evan, did you want to add into that thought?
Well, I'll add that, like, so I'm not Jewish, but my father is, and his parents were up until the Holocaust, which, in the process of escaping it, they kind of renounced Jewishness.
Wow.
And only held like the just very lightest remnant of that identity and culture. And as a kid, it's like I was raised with both Christmas and Hanukkah. But Hanukkah was very much just like light the candles. You have a present. You know, it's like the most surface level connection with Judaism. And this project was a chance for me to just sort of like revisit that disconnect and that history.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a conclusion to share. It's like just something that I've been chewing on over the course of the project, and like what it means to have the sort of ghost of that faith.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that's really interesting because, you know, you both talked about how part of this game, right, is being in a world where you don't fit, and like your family's trauma around surviving the Holocaust is a version of that story, right? Like living in a world where you don't fit into this world, or at least people don't want you to fit into this world. And so that, like you said, the ghost of the religion, I mean, it's part of that. That's in that story.
Yeah. And I think it comes out in ways in how the story ended up.
Yeah. Hannah, did you grow up in a religiously Jewish family, or more of like a, yeah?
I did, yeah. Not, I mean, you know, the culturally Jewish element was strong. I would say, like, weren't super devout, but sometimes when I tell people that I went to synagogue most weekends and went to Hebrew school and, you know, hit all the major holidays and the small ones, they're like, well, that's actually pretty Jewish.
Sounds, I mean, I'm a priest. It sounds pretty devout. Like I would like most of my parishioners to do what you just described for my church.
We were regular synagogue attendees. So yeah, it was a big part of my growing up. And then I think I went off to college and I was kind of like, I don't know. It's, you know,
sure.
And I'm coming back around.
Well, so it's really funny though. And you gave me an insight, and I've had this insight before. So we had some other, Gabrielle Rabinowitz, and on the show a couple weeks ago, we were talking about some of other Jewish games. And so I had a related thought to this then, but something you just said, Hannah, before really triggered this for me in like a good way, I think, or I really need to think about it, which is like when you said you were like a little bit, I don't know what word you used, but like kind of anxious about the idea of designing a Jewish game where you're like, well, is that proselytizing? Is that, but you know what, that's how I feel as like a Christian game designer and a Christian podcaster. Like, I know I'm doing a show called Holy Happy Hour Batman, so I kind of put it out there in this, but there's always an element of caution for myself, like internal caution when I do that. And I would never have thought to like design an explicitly Christian game because it feels so weird. It feels like like, well, that can't be received well. And plus, there's probably a lot of like bad versions of that out there. Like I don't want to be, and I don't want to do. But there's probably really good versions of it out there that could exist, like, or maybe they do, and I don't know them, but that could exist if the right approach is taken. Which it sounds like the two of you have found with Mud, where like it's like really insightful. Like we're going to take this insight from this spiritual tradition and help people explore it. But yeah, I have the same kind of feelings about the idea of designing a explicitly Christian game.
Yeah. Yeah, working through those, working through it.
Yeah.
So would you say that it's doing this as kind of, have you explored, like Jewish religion more like outside of the game design? Like, has it bled into your personal practice? I'm asking very personal questions, I know. But.
I think it has a little bit. I mean, obviously things have been pandemic-y. I've been thinking about, I've been living in this area for years and I've never gone to synagogue here where I live. It's like something that seems like, I'm still in my 30s, amazed every time I go grocery shopping on my own. I'm like, I can buy my own food. Like I never thought that I could like go to synagogue. Like it seems like a really adult thing to do. And I think there's barriers to cross too. It's like, will I like this particular faith-based community? That takes a lot of forms. Like, will this feel good to me? What's it going to be like to go in like to a service on Saturday for the first time and really long time? And like, is anybody going to greet me? What are the norms? So I'm at least asking those questions of the grocery store and the idea of going to synagogue. But I think it has sort of reconnected me. Yeah.
I don't think that those of us who do, well, I think a lot of times those of us who are like professional church people, regardless of faith, don't acknowledge, very often. See, and I'm going to connect this to RPG design too, because I think it really does. We don't acknowledge the vulnerability of coming to a church for the first time, because boy, oh boy, you are really, talk about a cold experience. Like, we don't put ourselves out there like this in culture anymore these days, right? We don't just show up like very often to a new thing without knowing a lot about it. We try to do as much investigation as possible, try to know what we're getting into, but it's really vulnerable because you show up and like all the things you just described, like how will you be welcomed? Will anyone say hi to you? Will it be a negative experience? Will sit there and have a horrible experience for an hour and then leave? I think that's that accessibility thing that you were talking about with game design too, right? Like where like it's a vulnerable experience to try to play a role-playing game for the first time.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So like acknowledging that, building that in, like I feel like there's there's a connection there about trying to help people have a accessible experience to something for the first time where it's like feels good if you want it to feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a thing that we dealt with, even though, the community space that we ran has long since closed down. It was like a question that we were asking every day. It was like how it was so much, like it took so much courage to come to an event like alone or to come to an event the first time. And like we had to be so, like it was just our job to make that first introduction work. And we failed a lot. Also I give myself like a little bit of slack because like we're pretty young. But I think about that, like, that first like minute really matters in terms of like whether somebody feels like welcomed and safe and invited into a space. In
retrospect, maybe it makes sense that so many of the people who walked through the door were role players.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. That's really interesting. Used to crossing that divide.
Yeah,
maybe. I am. So it does sound though like the experience of running a community center like that influenced the way you two approached designing games.
Definitely.
Yeah. That and going to conventions and running versions of the game for total strangers both give a lot of experience of like what it means for people to be crossing that threshold of entering something completely new to them and being asked to engage in a kind of like active, intimate, imaginative way with strangers.
Yeah, with strangers too. Something very that's an intimate process. Like it's a vulnerable process. So to do that with strangers is a lot.
It's a big ask.
Yeah.
Role-playing games ask so much, and it's amazing that they can work.
Yeah.
At all.
I love that the sentence ended there.
It's like that's it. It's just amazing that they can work.
Well, and I mean, like this is the constant theme of this show of Holy Happy Hour Batman is like that the space that we enter into when we role play is like the same space we enter into with religious experience. It's like that. It's that intrapsychic space of like where creativity and imagination and play and all that stuff happens, where we let ourselves be vulnerable, so that we can enter into like kind of a dangerous space in which all that stuff is born, like imagination and that just that activity. But yeah, that's sort of the recurring theme of this show, whether it's by design or not, that really is the same, like I say psychic space, I mean like psychological space that we enter into. And so yeah, I mean it's a vulnerable space, but I mean like I have kids, right? So I was talking about this with them earlier today. I was talking to my kids today about bleed, the concept of bleed.
Yeah.
Because we're sitting at the dinner table, and they're talking about how my oldest daughter became afraid of my middle daughter because they were playing a game where she was pretending to be, oh my gosh, why she was pretending to be this, I have no idea. But she was pretending to be an old murderous grandpa. Sorry, I can't even say that with a straight face, but she was pretending to be an old murderous grandpa. But my oldest daughter said she didn't know for sure she could trust her anymore.
Yeah.
Having played this old murderous grandpa as her. So I was explaining to them like this idea of like when you role play, this idea of like bleed between your character and you, and the experience of your character and your experience, and how sometimes when we role play something, the us that's not the character can take away that fear or take away that experience.
Yeah.
A powerful teaching moment. That's
Well, so my kids role play too, so I was like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to teach them something about role playing games, and also to tell them something that I don't know that I had ever told them before, which is like when they play like that, they're role playing.
Yeah,
it's really not too different than that. But which does remind me of something you said earlier, Hannah, which is that, and I'm curious if you want to speak a little bit to this more, or maybe there's not a lot more to be said about it, but as I completely agree with you. If you want to call it a game, I feel like call it a game, because I think like it's weird to me to limit that, because what I love about the games you guys design, I guess, is that just like there doesn't seem to be any limits to like what you're willing to do. Like, you know what I mean? Like everything's on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right? Like we can do whatever we want with this. It doesn't have to live in these constraints. I love that. I don't know if there's more to be said really about the idea that like anything can be a game, but yeah, I think that I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's just really fun. I think that there's value in defining things, and like being able to sort of come up with a shared enough definition that when you say to somebody like, "Oh, we're going to sit down for a crunchy," I mean, this is just what somebody once told me. I was at a convention and somebody was describing a game, and I was like, oh, I don't know, like, can you say a little bit more? Is it like my kind of thing? And they were like, oh, well, it's like this sort of crunchy game where you're going and slaying demons. And I had never heard the phrase crunchy game. And my only association with crunchy was like crunchy granola. Like, you know, it's like sort of flowy nature. Right. And I was like, oh, crunchy. Yeah, that sounds like my thing. And, you know, then began the worst 3 hours of my life. In this sort of like very number crunching game. So like obviously definitions are useful, right. And that was just one that I happened to not know. But also I think that, I mean, a game is so, I don't know, it's like what if you say making your bed in the morning is a game, like how does that change it? If you say a poem, like there's a poem, or you could call this poem a game, and how does that change it? I think it can change the way that you approach something. And so even though Mud, I think that there are probably some people who would argue Mud's ungameness. And I think we're still sort of just asking people, you know, if they have the desire to do so, to approach it as a game.
I think that that idea of approaching something as a game, those are powerful words on their own, because they describe a kind of approach where you're thinking, okay, I'm going into a space that has some rules. I'm going into a space that isn't exactly my own life. It's like sort of cordoned off, and like there's like a zone that this game takes place in where there's going to be certain rules and certain things that happen, and things that happen to me aren't necessarily happening to me. They're happening to sort of the self that I'm bringing to this game. It has a sort of sense of separation in that way. And then there's just a massive host of associations that people will take with them into a game. Just being like, okay, well, what kind of game is it? And like, what kind of dice do I need? And like, do I need a snack before I go in? You know, like people, like, it's like, people have a sort of sense of what it means to enter a game space. And also a lot of it is, how do I win? Am I going to win? If I'm not going to win, how am I going to feel about losing? And like, what are the terms and definitions of losing? Because I don't want to lose in a way that I can't handle. That's a particularly unpleasant way to lose. And so all of that stuff being brought into Mud, which is certainly a more vague sort of game than a very formal board game or something. I feel like those are still really useful associations and ideas to bring into the story. And to some extent, I feel like it's balancing out an aspect of graphic novels, or even just fiction in general, which is a thing where you just sort of sit back and just go with the flow and just let the story go along, like you're just following the thread. And that's interrupted by the interactive elements of Mud. Like it asks you to stop and do something, or make a choice, or like physically like pick up something and hold it, or to think of other things going on in your life. And in that way, it pushes you towards a more active kind of reading, which this is a way you can read anything. You know, you can certainly read something and then pause and be like, what's that reminding me of? Like, or like, what's that person actually feeling right now as they say that? Like, it's not spelled out in the book, but like, I can imagine, and this is you giving more of yourself to a story, and it's fleshing out the gaps of what's described with your own experiences and interpretations. And I really like the idea of how that can personalize a story and take something that does come from Hannah's life and my life and make it something that's the reader's. And I also like that it encourages a sort of guarded, I guess, like sort of guarded vulnerability, being like, we're going to ask you to do certain things, but it's just as part of a game. You know, you're playing the game, and one of the connotations of a game is that it's just a game. You know, it's just a game. It's no big deal. But if you want to engage with the game, here it is. And some people will approach that very seriously and it'll, you know, it almost makes a holy text out of rules, right? Where it's like, this is what you should do now. And other people will encounter those same rules and say like, oh, like, should I do them or not? Like, how much am I like in the grips of this game and of its rules and of its ideas? And because Mud in particular is a story that goes to some kind of intense places, I think it's useful that people can have that kind of detachment and a sort of active choice about how deeply they want to engage with each page as it comes. I think I got way off on a tangent there. I do not remember what set me off.
No, that was really good. So it just makes me think of when I had I mentioned before a month ago now, I don't even know, a couple weeks ago, I had Gabrielle Rabinowitz and Ben Bisagno on the show talking about their game Manishtana, which is Why Is This Night Different? Manishtana, Why Is This Night Different? Which is like a Passover game. And one of the things we talked about in that episode was how there's something about sort of the Jewish approach to text, which is to, like, I don't even have the right words for it, but to bring yourself into it. You know, bring yourself into the story. So it's not just a story as if you're listening to something from the past, or it's not just a story in the way maybe I think a lot of times people treat religious texts as like the way you're just talking about, the way people treat rules texts as very much like, no, it's this, and this is exactly what it says, and this is exactly what it means. That very sort of literalist approach. Whereas like in a lot of Jewish spirituality, you're invited to play with the text and personalize it. And so I don't know if that was something that just sort of was intentional about the way, you know, this formed, or if it was just sort of coincidental the way Mud formed. But there's something about that just strikes me as very Jewish.
Yeah, you know, it wasn't intentional, but I'm glad you said that because you know, when we had launched the Kickstarter, and it was, you know, we were already sort of off this Twitter golem thing. It was like in the past. Sure. But I was curious if anybody was going to ask us, like, are you Jewish? Like, do you have the right to be telling this story? And somebody did ask. Yeah. And it's the type of thing where a Jewish, and it's, you know, like it's okay that this person asked. Like, I'm happy to say, you know, here is the context that like we both have for telling this story. But a Jewish person would be like, oh, this game is really Jewish. Like you can sort of, a Jewish person can like see the Jewish framing for the game, and just like see that it's sort of like that it's making, and the way it is made and the way it's presented is just like Jewish, in a way that it's hard to even explain that to, like, I don't know how I would explain that to the person who asked, like, do you both have the right to be making this game? Because it's just like, you'd have to explain thousands of years of context about what where this game comes from. So, yeah, not a fully formed thought, but it is something that I've sort of been thinking about as we it's like how sometimes somebody will say like, yeah, this is a queer game, or this is a queer story. And somebody from the outside might be like, I don't quite understand like how, because there wasn't a certain type of sex in it or something, like something that somebody else has imagined is like looking like, oh, well, that's to me what a queer story looks like. And you kind of got to be like, really steeped in it to know.
Well, 2 weeks ago, I had Bo Sheldon on the show, and they were talking about Turn, which is a role-playing game about like shape-shifting creatures in a small, like people in a small town, shapeshifters live in a small town, and it's a queer game telling queer stories, right? But like you might be like, wait, why? What? Like why?
Yeah, what about a shapeshifter? I mean, which obviously Mud has, draws from that too. I don't understand. What about a shapeshifter? Yeah.
Right. If you don't know, maybe you're not going to be able to get it, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. You said there's like thousands of years of context, right, that go into this. That's a really interesting way to think about it. And how do you convey a couple thousand years of context?
Yeah, I mean, so it's like, there's the part of me that can sort of be offended that person didn't see those thousands of years and can see that, like, yes, of course I have the right to make this game. This comes from a really personal place. And then there's the part that can be understanding and, know that question is coming from an innocent place.
Yeah, but it might be, how cool would it be if somebody played a game like Mud and left it going like, oh wow, I might actually understand some of that context a little better than I did before I started it. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm. It would be, really cool. Yeah.
So I was curious if the two of you know Alex Roberts' game Precious Little Animal. I don't know if that's a game that you all have encountered at all, or
I'm not familiar with it.
I only ask because it is a solo journaling RPG. Well, RPG is probably not even solo journaling game. At least the word "game" is on the end, which is all the talk we had about like what counts as a game. This is kind of I was just curious if the two of you had experienced that, because it's similar where like you're journaling.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a game?
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that is sort of like you said. I wonder how much of that is your approach to it. Like, if you approach this journaling exercise as a game, kind of like you're saying, Evan, does that transform it into a game?
Yeah. I mean, I'm very into, like, verbing the word game and just being like, you can bring game into it. And, like, that can be the intended way for it to be experienced. It's like, bring your game here.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It can also be. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
It can also be. It's been verbed in some like weird ways too. I mean, it's been sort of corporately verbed, like where it's like, we're gonna gamify this getting to know you training, and you're like, no, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. So I guess the game is like also, about the heart behind it.
Mm-hmm. We're gonna gamify this experience of you being molded into our corporate environment, our corporate ethos.
But also, some of that, it's like some of the corporate culture around gaming hasn't caught up or isn't in on gaming's conversation about buy-in and consent, and the door is always open. Like, if you have to play the game at your office retreat, like it's potentially asking a lot of you. Yeah. It's like some of the stuff we were talking about in terms of vulnerability and opening yourself up. I mean, that's like, that sounds, I feel sweaty just thinking about that.
But bringing your game to the thing. I've thought about this with like church stuff. I don't have any good answers. Like you said, this is also not a finished thought, but I have thought about that a lot with like the idea of church, where it's like, how can I bring game into this? And I don't mean just like a game club, because we have one at my church that we do on Saturday nights, where we play board games and role-playing games. And actually, I was just saying to Blaine, who's one of the people that runs the game night with me, that we really need to play Noirlandia at our game night, because I was like reading about Noirlandia today, And I was just like, this is like the perfect game for this. You know, like the idea of just bringing to my game night a cork board and some string and being like, yes, let's solve a murder. Anyway, now I'm going on a tangent.
You have the cocktail now, so
yes, exactly.
I mean,
yes.
I just designed this stuff for what I would want, and then I try to share it with the world. But yeah, no, I've thought about this a lot with church, like bringing game. What would it be like to bring game into this, to bring play into it? And I think there's other people out there who are trying to like do that and play in that space. And like I said, it's not a finished thought. I don't know the answer to it, but I am really intrigued by the idea also of like what it's like to bring game into the spaces and see what happens. But like I said, that's not a finished thought. I don't have any deep insights.
It's like, I don't know if it could ever be a finished thought. I mean, that's such it's a big question.
So speaking of questions, that is a good reminder actually that just as we're continuing to talk here, if people are in the chat want to throw questions in, we would love to have them. So please feel free to throw questions in the chat to our audience here. So let me ask you, while we wait and see if people do throw questions into the chat, what the two of you are working on now. I meant to actually bring up at the beginning of this conversation your Patreon, and I wanted to ask you, is it Turtle and Bun? Is it Turtle Bun? I was a little confused by the branding.
That's fair.
Sorry.
It's Turtle Bun.
Yeah.
But Turtle Bun was taken on Twitter.
Okay.
And Instagram, maybe. I can't remember. It was taken on one of the ones that
It was taken on Twitter. Yeah. It was charming.
Yes, I will say, if you do want to visit the Turtle Bun Twitter, it's fascinating. So just a little like intimate peek into somebody else's life. So we're Turtle and Bun on Twitter and Instagram, literally just because Turtle Bun was taken.
Yeah.
But in terms of formal branding, it's Turtle Bun, which is the Patreon and our website.
Sorry, I'm only laughing because Joshua Newman, it was like...
Is Joshua Newman here?
In the chat, he said followed. I'm assuming in reference to the other Twitter account.
I think it's been like an inactive account for many years, but it was just...
I really like the idea that this person on Twitter is just getting followers and they have no idea why. Like suddenly all these RPG enthusiasts are following my Twitter account. I have no clue why. Anyway, I'm sorry. So so you are experimenting there on Patreon with that, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean we have a Patreon. Patrons get any of the like smaller games that we make and release on Itch.io. Our patrons there's a few different tier levels, and everybody gets everything at whatever level. It's just about whether you want to back at $2 or $10, like wherever you're at. And as a result of the MUD Kickstarter, we took this time to do updates to every single one of our small games. Patrons are about to get like a huge updated drop of like every small game we've ever made, awesome. Massively rewritten. So if anybody wants to get in on that for $2 or more, you'll get like a ton of games soon. But so we have our Patreon, and we're also doing some other things on Patreon. Like we've been working on some video game stuff. We have a long-term project of YouTube project called Dream Journal, where I narrate my dreams and Evan animates them as like a turtle and a bunny. And it's been very slow going. I mean, we started to record the episodes right around the time that the pandemic got really bad, and we kind of, I think a lot of people kind of pulled in on themselves a little bit.
We really need to hustle on that first episode.
But yeah,
so pandemic centric.
The first episode was me having my first sort of like maskless, like, in a public place and there's too many people, panic. I was like at a game convention. And we got to get that out while it's still relevant. So yeah, our Patreon is, it's really just a way to, throw us a little extra monthly support if people like what we do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's really cool. And so I'm like actively trying to subscribe at the $2 level right now as you're describing it to me. I'm like, all right, okay, sign in.
Don't feel pressure. Don't feel like strong
I
armed
want to
into
get the stuff.
Get
That's
the
why I'm
games.
like, oh, this sounds like too good to miss out on.
Yeah, there's going to be a loot drop.
Yeah, exactly. I will share the link to this in the chat.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I saw that is there another new game the two of you are working on besides? I thought I saw that on one of your websites. Now I had it up on a tab, but I've lost myself in the sea of tabs here.
Probably
maybe you saw Starship Ultralux.
That's the one.
Yeah. So Starship Ultralux is it's a role-playing game about the surviving crew of a luxury space cruise line that's gone a million years off course. And you play as a cast of characters who are the only living beings left aboard this impossibly huge, impossibly futuristic cruise liner. But you're in a world of robots and automated, like, leisure and comfort objects, and the sort of evolved descendants of like food and decorative table displays.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's sort of a game of like the equivalent of like if a tree falls in the wilderness, will anybody hear it?
Mm-hmm.
But like capitalism, like if capitalism continued in robotic form for a million years and nobody was there to hear it, like what would that sort of continued silent opulence look like when people, come back into it?
That's such a good description.
I know, this is the first time I've ever described it like this.
Yes,
I'm like,
we gotta clip this. Is right. Yeah.
Yeah. We've had a hard time sort of figuring out how to describe the game, that's it.
No, that's good. It made me think. I just pictured the Wall-E, like the ship in Wall-E that they're in, but just if it just had gone, if Wall-E had never saved the people and they just had drifted off into the galaxy for thousands of years, that's
a great image of what we're going for. Totally.
Sorry, I was just reading the chat. So there's a really good question in the chat. The question that Joshua Newman just put was, wait, the food and table decorations had babies. I don't think that's really a question exactly.
It's more of a comment than a question, Joshua.
There really is a good question here. I just got to scroll back up about mud that I wanted to make sure we touched on. And why don't I see? Oh, there it is. So Walrus Waltz. Thank you, Walrus Waltz, for watching and for asking a good question. What were some major changes between the first and final versions of Mud?
Oh, yeah. It's funny because our next episode of Design Doc is going to be about like small, sort of like becoming obsessed with small changes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Does anything jump to mind for you, Evan?
There's more pictures.
Yeah, a lot. Oh gosh, I feel so bad. There's so many more pictures. I mean, Evan illustrated the whole thing, and I think at some point, like, in our conversations, I was like, I was sort of imagining it as more of a graphic novel, Evan. And he was like, well, graphic novels take like years to make.
I mean, when we described that time where Hannah came and it's like, talk me out of this. I'm thinking of like the zine, exploring Jewish culture. I was like, yeah, a zine. That sounds great. It's like going to be text. I can make little doodles in the margins.
That was scrappy.
So fun.
Yeah. That's why definitions are important, because to me, zine and graphic novel were apparently synonymous.
There was this early phase where it was just like, where I was like, so, I was thinking maybe I'd put a drawing of this here, and then, then there'd be space for whatever text, whatever the golem is saying for this part. And Hannah's like, I don't think the golem should be talking yet. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's great. That makes sense. So I guess we'll just express what the golem is doing with illustrations then.
So bad.
Oh, okay, so we'll just convey deep emotional insights through visual pictures.
Right.
Yeah.
That you're gonna draw. So okay.
I feel really, really lucky that, Evan, you're just an incredibly talented graphic novelist and animator, and I just this is my. It's one of those things that I just take for granted because, people pay the big bucks for this. I'm just like, Evan, you want a slice of pizza while you draw for 20 hours
on this little 2-week project? How long did Mud end up taking from first conversation to published final Kickstarter?
So originally,
further, I guess.
Originally, I think we had set the delivery date in April, just being so sure we were going to deliver before then. Because it kickstarted in October and it was only a 2-week Kickstarter. And we were just like, if we say April, we are so deeply in the safe zone, we'll deliver months early. And it just shipped out. So it's August now. And some people still haven't gotten theirs because we're waiting on some special tier rewards. So, we'll wait. But it's a graphic novel.
Yeah. That's double the time, but it's more than double what we imagined in the beginning.
I was going to say that question was not meant to be a call out because I did not.
Oh no, I didn't even read it as a call out.
But no, I mean it's just these things can take a lot longer. I mean, it's just especially given the pandemic, just everything is taking longer, which I also think that's one of the nice things about Kickstarter, right? Because the people that probably back a game like Mud and support the two of you through Kickstarter, Patreon, or whatever, are going to be the kind of people that understand. They know
on the whole, definitely. On the whole, people are so supportive and they're interested in seeing it done and seeing it done well. And then occasionally somebody's like, "It's been a little while. What's going on with you guys?" But we try to just be really, really open and just put it out there. We're still working. It's taking longer. This is what we're doing. This is why. And there's always just such a temptation to clam up around projects going long or going you're going somewhere a little bit off the rails from how you imagined it going. And Hannah is particularly good at just being we're just going to type through it. Let them know where we're at. It'll be okay.
I have this magic power, which is this spidey sense of when somebody is about to complain. So it's for some reason, it's always I'll wake up in the morning with this cloud over me and I'm like, we got to get a backer update out, Evan. And then that day somebody's like, it's been a long time since you guys have said anything. So, so my magic power is that if I wake up in the morning and I say it's time for a backer update, we gotta cruise. We gotta beat the person who I'm psychically connected to in that moment to the punch.
It's like a magic power that comes from, I don't know whether that's, I'm just thinking it's if you could take, it's the upside to codependency or something. I can predict when someone's going to complain to me about something. It might not be from codependency. It could be from just some form of anxiety. I don't know. But this idea of turning it into a superpower, now I can predict when someone's going to complain before they even do it. It's
I'm riding the tides of dissatisfaction or something.
I didn't even know you could do a 2-week Kickstarter actually.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
No, that was part of the appeal of this was we've been talking for ages about wanting to do small Kickstarters and just short form projects that don't consume us for too long. And also a Kickstarter campaign, the campaign itself is a huge project.
Yeah, right.
And there's a emotional arc to running a Kickstarter campaign where there's a big dip in the middle because it starts with a massive adrenaline rush of activity and interest and it precipitously drops off. And like all the weird chemicals that your brain was putting out in response to that initial enthusiasm and support suddenly all dry up. And you're like, hello, anybody still there? Yeah. So part of the appeal of a short Kickstarter is shrinking that middle section and just having like your strong opening and your strong close, not worrying about the longer form kinds of outreach that a month-long Kickstarter allows, which is definitely better for things like if you wanted to get an article up somewhere, and you're working with their timeline of how long it takes. But I love a short Kickstarter. I'm into it. We didn't quite nail the short project part of it.
No, but we're still working on that. That'll be the next one.
Yeah, eventually come up with an idea that doesn't end up growing outside of itself. Maybe. Or maybe
I hope
not.
so.
Maybe
yeah.
not.
Well, part of the thing, like we've talked a lot about wanting to do Kickstarters where we've done the thing already and we're just kickstarting for the money to actually print it.
Yeah.
Because the design process is weird. It's especially weird if you are committed to making the best thing you can and you're going to revisit that commitment over and over the course of the process and be like, is this working? Could it be better? Is it worth like restructuring the whole story if it's not feeling right? And this is what's happening with Questline U2 as well. Like, we could have started the podcast after designing most of the game, running the Kickstarter, and then just start the process there. It's like, okay, we have the money, we have the time, we're just going to finalize the design here. But instead, we're at that weird prehistory phase of Questline U2, where the idea of the game has shifted many times and been influenced by a lot of other stuff that's going on in our lives. And it's been much less straightforward. It's had interruptions of whole extra games, and eventually it's like, it's going to get to Kickstarter. It's going to be on that much more straightforward ramp towards completion. But hopefully most Kickstarter backers understand when they're in a project that's in that like woogity phase of discovering the thing that you're making as you make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so kind of as a comment to all of that, Joshua said in the chat, all projects are bigger than you think, even taking into account this principle. So I feel like there's probably a lot of wisdom to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really hard to know how big a project is going to be before you start.
Joshua has all the best ways of expressing that idea.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we're pretty much close to time here, and I do want to. So this is my weird limbo of hoping that the other stream, that we raid into will start in the amount of time it takes for me to do what we're about to do. So hopefully that all works out. But before we say goodbye to the two of you, can you just give us one more chance or one more round of like where people can find you, how people can support what you're doing, that kind of stuff. Either of you
want to do it, Hannah?
Yeah. So if you previously followed along with our stuff at Make Big Things, we've transitioned to the role-playing game part of that to Turtlebun now. So our website's turtlebun.com. Our Patreon is, I think it's just patreon.com/turtlebun. Our Twitter and Instagram, as you have heard, is Turtle and Bun, although you're free to follow whoever is at Turtlebun on either one of those accounts. And we're going to be making games big and small and some other weird things too. Maybe some YouTubes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the YouTube channel? Well, it's not done yet, right? It's not live.
Oh, yeah. So that, if people are following us, just following along normally, then eventually when we launch our YouTube stuff, it'll be pretty easy to find. We also have a Discord that we just launched. I actually have no idea how to share a Discord.
So you need the link. So
yeah.
let me ask you this: is the link to the Discord server up somewhere, like on your Twitter account or?
Not yet, but you know what? We'll tweet it out, and then there it will be. So
is it a Discord? Is it an open Discord or?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. We had opened it up to patrons this past week to kind of like iron out the kinks, but you know it is joinable by anybody.
Cool, that's awesome. I definitely will want to be joining that.
Great.
That Discord sounds like it's going to have a really cool energy. So
I think so.
Any other socials folks should follow for you guys, or?
You're welcome to follow me at Hand Bandit on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter as A Drawn Novel.
Cool. Well, thank you both, Hannah and Evan, for coming on Holy Happy Hour, Batman. I really can't tell you how grateful I am for your time and coming on to share all this wonderful stuff about game design. I could have talked about any one of your games for so long and really gotten into the nitty gritty about it. But I just appreciate the two of you making the time to come on and talk to me about Mud and talk to me about life and your design thoughts and principles. So thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure.
Thank you for your time. This was really fun.
Absolutely. Oh, and one thing I did forget to tell the two of you before the show, I always tell my guests is I always ask folks to hang around for just a few minutes if you would in my little digital green room, as in don't change anything, because I'm going to do what I did at the beginning and say goodbye to everybody. So if the two of you don't mind hang around for just a minute, we're going to say goodbye to the two of you right now, and I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody else here in just a second. So, all right. So thank you all, everyone, for watching another Holy Happy Hour Batman. I am so thankful for you all coming here and joining us, and wow to these two amazing guests for this awesome conversation. Make sure you check out their Patreon. The links are there in the chat. Listen to Design Doc. It's such a good podcast, seriously. Really fun to listen to. And the kind of energy you heard in this episode between the two of them and humor and stuff like that is all in Design Doc. It's really fun. So I highly recommend it. So, okay. So a couple of things here at the end real quick, and then we're going to raid on over to our other show. Please don't forget to hit the follow button right here, if you would please, on this Twitch page, on my Twitch. And hey, you can technically subscribe to my Twitch, which I would be very grateful if you did, which is something that you could do. So you can subscribe also. If you only caught part of tonight's show, you're going to be able to watch the whole thing on demand for a brief time here on Twitch, but you can head on over to allportsopen.com, to our network site, allportsopen.com, to watch every episode of this show afterward. You can also find All Ports Open Network on YouTube. Search YouTube for All Ports Open, and you can watch all of our video content on our network there. So please check out all of our shows. We've got some great Twitch streams going on. Monday nights right after this show, we're going to raid into it at All Ports Open on Twitch. It's Branching Paths with Kimber and Josh. So we're going to be jumping into that here in just a minute. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m., at the Worst Days on Twitch are 2 nights of horror games with 2 awesome casts, actual play horror games from our original horror game, The Worst Days, that Josh, my co-founder of the All Ports Open Network, designed. It's a really great game, and they're really fun horror shows, and that's on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then on Thursdays at All Ports Open on Twitch, we live stream a recording of No Avatars Allowed with me. I'm on that show, and other great hosts. It's a video game and theology podcast. So go to allportsopen.com, check out all of our shows. You'll see all the stuff that's there. We got a lot of good stuff I hope you'll check out. So I'm That Gamer Priest, Ben. We'll be back here next week at 7:30 p.m. with Grant Ellis, another really awesome guest I cannot wait to talk to. So thank you again, everyone. I hope you enjoy the holiest and happiest of hours with what's left of your evening. And have a great week, everybody. And I really hope to see you all here very soon.
Ah! What is it, honey?
It's that darn ghost again. He just won't leave us alone. I guess we're just going to have to move.
No, wait. Don't worry. We're not moving. He is.
Who are you going to call?
Blockbusters. Actually, we know nothing about catching ghosts other than what we saw in that old cartoon. But if you want a podcast where we talk about film, TV, random tangents that leave you wondering what the hell was that all about, and the occasional nugget of wisdom, then we're the ones for you. And if you act now, you can listen to our entire back catalogue for free.
Did you say free?
Yes, I did. So go now to your nearest podcatching device, shake off the ectoplasm, and download us today. Warning, listening to Blowbusters can lead to stomach cramps from laughing, headache from attempting to remember what tangent they went on this time, and a worn-out section of your device's screen/keyboard as you smash the replay button over and over until the next episode arrives. If your Blowbusters episode lasts longer than 4 hours, tell your doctor so he can listen as well.